So I'll back into it based on that. So even the way you were experiencing her, the fact that you engaged in such a boot camp idea meant that you ultimately felt like she was for you, even if your experience didn't bear that out.
Well, exactly. And it's conflicting, as you can tell, because if you're looking at it through a Windows base, you're like, you don't care. Obviously, this marriage isn't worth enough to fight for it the way that I think it should be fought for. And having counseled thousands of couples myself, I would be like, this is what I would recommend to other people. Fight for your marriage. What are you willing to do? And where Molly was simply isolating. I was like, I don't know another neurotypical couple where isolation would be helpful. Maybe in terms of if there was abuse, maybe, or if you needed a few days or, a week apart, like I get it, but there's not too many paths in terms of my, counseling and therapy, framework where that would be helpful. Talking things out would be a little bit more helpful, like getting together and addressing the issue. But I think Molly's isolation was she just didn't know what to do. And I had rejected her. There were a couple times where she would, more than a couple, there were many times she would come to me and say, "What's wrong?" And I'd be like, if you don't know what's wrong, then we might as well just stop the conversation. Like I can't even like there's no in the Windows framework system, there's no way where that makes sense to me. And so I literally would have to just and that's where I hit the wall. I was like, I gotta figure out, I need to invite a third party into this so that I can, and maybe there's a program that I'm not aware of, like boot camp, where I'm just like, oh, wait a minute, I can bridge the gap. I can do this. There's ways to reinterpret things, but I needed outside help to do that because I didn't have it.
So Molly, for you, because as a neurotypical working with neurotypicals, there's sometimes the mindset like, if I just tell my spectrum spouse what to do, they will understand it and then they will just follow through. So, like, why aren't they following through? I have told them. And, I am feeling rejected and she's isolating, or like, this is the exact opposite. So, for you, Molly, is that part of like, I don't know what to do? I know he needs something, but I don't know what to do in this moment. So I just don't want to make it worse, or kind of what's going on in your processing when you see he needs something, but you've chosen to go up to your room because so what's going on for you?
I think I knew that I didn't have the ability to help him and give to him what he wanted without him helping me. And he's been helping me our whole marriage, and I'm so grateful for it. I wasn't able in that moment to see how hard it was for him and how difficult things had gotten for him, but I just knew something was up. And imagine what that feels like. Like, I mean, I don't know, when your kids are young or even when you have adult kids, like watching your kids struggle and not being able to intervene and help them, and just watching them struggle, and that's just it, and you can't do anything. Well, that's what it is in my marriage. Like, I'm actually the source of his pain. He hasn't come out and said it, but I can figure that out. I can't do anything about it. And so it perpetuates a level of, I don't know, shame or guilt or whatever in me. And it's like, well, why try? Because even as I would come close to him, he's so hurt at this point, and Gary is a people pleaser. I am not. So he's tried for so long, and he's protected and done all of these things, and I haven't responded the way that he's wanted to. So he's so hurt now. So even if I take, just a few steps forward, that's not going to be enough for him. Like, it has to be pretty catastrophic change. And I don't know how to do that. So that's where I think we become stuck, right? I feel like that's where we were stuck. And I just was like, okay, we're either going to need to find a third party, someone to help us, or what? Like, are we just done with this marriage? Because I just don't know what to do to move forward with it. Not that I don't want to. It's just I don't know. And there's that protective element. And I think other women on the spectrum would probably agree with me with this. You spend your whole life being wrong, your whole life. Like, you're told in society, so many of the ways that you act or the things that you say or you do or how you are around your friends or whatever it is that you make so many mistakes every single day. And it just gets tiring. And it gets tiring of being told that you're wrong. So now you're in a marriage relationship and my husband, who's very gracious about it, but how many times do I want to keep hearing, well, that's weird, or why do you think like that? Or nobody thinks like that, or, it gets tiring. And so there is a level of self protection that I had, which I feel like most people would have. Gary's self protecting and I'm self protecting.
So
I,
let's kind of switch to what you think some of the differences are, being kind of reverse, the woman on the spectrum and the male neurotypical. What do you think is slightly different in the kind of presentation or some of y'all's challenges in your neurodiverse marriage?
well, I've heard Molly say before many times that I'm so glad that, you're the one who's neurotypical because you're the male. And so there's an inherent ability to just follow a male figure in a relationship. And so Molly has told me before that she's so glad that that's the case. And you know so it is interesting in that way, and it's interesting too because I've been told many times that I'm the emotional one in the relationship, and it's kind of funny because I don't really see myself that way, but I am an emotional person, but I tend to have some more I'm more in touch with my feelings perhaps, or I see things differently. And so that emotional, relational, emotional, social piece is really pronounced in my life and not so pronounced in Molly's life. So there's a degree in which she can um, depend on me in a healthy way, but she can also depend on me in an unhealthy way. She's like, well, my husband's going to be there, so I don't really need to stand on my own 2 feet, and I can just sort of let his personality win the room, and and whatever. But I don't, you know, that's yeah. So it's interesting just being in the more emotional, in touch with my feelings piece. And like I remember one time, I think I was church planting and I was going through a hard time, and Molly kind of slapped me on the back like a construction worker. And she said, well, I'll pray for you about that. And I'm like, oh, thanks. Appreciate that. And it was just kind of funny. And I was like, wow, like that's how she's gonna deal with my pain. Is just slap me on the back and say, I'll pray for you about that. So yeah, that part does play a role in it for sure.
That's funny. Dan has one too. It's 1, 2, 3, which we call Pobre honey. So it's like that's my sympathetic. I
Yeah.
don't know what to say, but here you go. So we call that the Pobre honey.
Yeah. Yeah. And the other thing
Sympathetic
too is
pat.
that there's a there's a there are there are times when Molly has to reframe things for me. And I find that to be really helpful. Like, for example, I don't know if you've ever started a business before, or you've done something very complex or something very difficult. Like, for example, scaling a business is very difficult to do, especially when you have financial limitations. You just can't go hire all the work that you need. And so you kind of feel stuck. And so you're wrestling with something and you don't really know how to overcome the obstacle. And every now and again, Molly will be like, when like you have a problem that you can't solve in your business. I'm like, yes, I definitely have those problems. She goes, that's how I feel right now in this situation. I'm like, oh, okay. So, and what's funny about that is I can see all those problems as I do a lot of, leadership and business coaching with other people. I can see those problems all day long in somebody else's business or someone else's life. But when it comes to my own, I'm like, I don't know how to overcome this. Like I'm just stuck. I'm overwhelmed and I don't see a way out. And so it's really helpful for Molly to reframe things for me in that way.
And I just feel like the differences on from my perspective, yeah, biblically speaking, that it does feel like a man is more head of the household. And that definitely makes it easier for me. And I think of the reverse, where male is going to be neurodiverse. To me, that must be immense pressure because you're providing for your family financially, you're providing for your family emotionally, just so many other ways. And it's not to say that the wife isn't in partner with you and working with you in that, but I do not spin a lot of plates at once. I don't have the ability to do it. And And so I'm not sure what that would look like if I was supposed to quote unquote carry this family. That would be pretty disastrous, and not even just the fact that I'm married to a male, but Gary he's a strong male, he's a strong individual, and he's able to do a lot of that. And so I feel like that part of the differences in that is where it's our life, and I don't want to put down somebody else's life if they're the opposite of us. That's their life, and I want to believe that there's the grace for them to be able to live that. But that feels like a bonus for us because I'm totally fine to follow, totally fine to do that, totally fine to trust my husband, and I don't have to feel shame in that, because that feels like more of a female role.
But
Yeah.
it's also one of those things where you have to, like, if you're going to compare yourself to neurotypical couples, you're just in trouble.
Yeah.
Like, I remember thinking, well, I got to read all these books on marriage because I'm struggling, and none of them just kind of worked. It was like reading a different computer language. It was just like these don't apply to my relationship. And so I think redefining what a successful relationship looks like, what does a successful relationship look like in terms of roles? How do we need to change and adapt, and not recruit all these expectations from, the Bible, or from other, or maybe just focus on different passages in the Bible for our success. And that to me is really important, because it's not about, well, who's the best at fulfilling the traditional roles of male and female. This is about, like, how do we make this thing work, and how do we lean on each other's strengths, and how do we mitigate each other's weaknesses?
So let's back up to the question about resetting expectations and connect it to where we are now. What it sounds like I'm hearing, and all the question is to confirm, is after the reset, you are able to function more as partners than you were before.
How would you answer that
Well,
question?
I mean, I think in general, yes, but that definitely hits a tender spot because partnership is very difficult for me. Very difficult. And that would take probably too long to unpack what that really is. But I would say that it's moved me closer to it. It's helped Gary to see how difficult partnership is for me. And again, he's having to have grace for me in working on that with me. So I would say yes, but not 100%. What about you, Gary?
Yeah, you don't have to qualify it as we're great partners. You're growing partners.
Yeah, there we go.
Yeah. And, I think Molly struggles with sense of team and her role on a team and her place and whatever. And I think I've just had to reframe the entire thought. It's like my wife is trying to help me. And, because I kind of remove this idea of, like, we're a team, we're partners. Does that terminology is not helpful in my relationship with Molly, but to say that we're helping each other and we're moving toward a common good in the end, I think is really important.
I like what you said. You've got to get out of sometimes traditional gender roles, because, people can pick these like 6 or 7 verses in the Bible and kind of like, we're not meeting these standards. But then there's other verses that talk about loving one another and bearing up one another and preferring one another and bear each other's burdens and so fulfill the law of Christ. So there's all this other stuff in the Bible about bearing up and accommodating and loving. And that might look, different. And that certainly was one of the resets for us that Dan's like, I can't take on a lot of things to work and take on many, many things. Give me one thing I can do that would be helpful. And what's one big thing, but I can't do all the other things. And so when we kind of figured that out, which is cooking in our house, which I'm very grateful for, I have the executive function to do many, many, many other things and details most of the time. That's struggling with age, but up until this current place in time, that's kind of how we kind of figure that out. Is like, what makes our system work better? What makes your system work better? And trying to just pigeonhole it into this one thing that I call utopian Christian marriage, and trying to pigeonhole it into these rules and roles based on whatever religious belief you come from, you're going to fail every single time if you don't look at yourself as individuals and your system as individuals operating within the biblical mindsets of love and bear up each other. But it doesn't necessarily mean these crazy gender roles that people have kind of put upon us.
Yeah. It's really a fascinating conversation. The other thing is that Molly and I don't communicate well. Like I mean, we do. I mean, we attempt, right? Like, and we work really hard, and I think we're better at it than we ever have been. It's just I shouldn't say we don't communicate well. It's just difficult to get on the same page with things, and we have to spend 3 hours talking about something as opposed to 20 minutes, and that's just the way that it is. And it's interesting, being in ministry and loving a lot of the area of counseling and therapy. I literally, I can honestly say with all of my heart that, working with you, during our time working with you and beyond, there was a season where we put in about 1,000 hours of work into our relationship. And I'm not exaggerating. I could literally count them out. It was 20 hours a week, or 25 hours a week. And you would say, how is that even possible? Listen, it's possible. We would spend 6 or 8 hours on a Saturday, 6 hour or 8 hours on a Sunday. It would be 3 or 4 nights a week of 3 hours. I mean, there was a lot of effort that went into this relationship because we both valued it. And we thought, if we can't overcome this, and Molly talks about gospel-centered relationships, like how does the gospel live itself out, or what does the gospel look like in your relationship? That's a really, that's a really convicting question. And Molly tends to be really convicting in terms of her sense of holiness, and we kind of joke about that. But 1,000 hours, and when couples say, "Listen, we went to 2 hours of counseling and we talked, for another 5 hours," I say, "Well, when you get to 200 hours, let me know."
Right.
Or when you get to 3 or 500 hours, then let me know. And if it still doesn't work after 500 hours, but give it a shot. And I think God values marriage so much that we need to value the gospel in our relationship and marriage that much too. And so I look back over it and think, wow, like that's a lot of hours to pour into our relationship. But I think it speaks to the value of our relationship and our marriage, because we both value it. And we both, not from just an external standpoint, from people looking at us and watching us, and there's a lot at stake and all that kind of stuff. But there's also the sense of like, where is the gospel powerful enough to overcome the challenges that we have in our relationship? And we both want to say yes to that we just haven't figured it out. Like, we're on our way and we value it. We just haven't figured it out. And I think that's been one of the most important driving aspects of this whole thing for us, is how do we find the gospel in our relationship?
So, as we're kind of ending today, I'm going to throw one of the last questions to you, Gary, because you are in ministry and you do have some, pastoral counseling background and you've done marriage counseling. Will you speak to our pastoral counselors or coaches out there about the training that is there for neurodiverse couples? Did you have anything kind of coming up in your ministerial training that would prepare you for a neurodiverse couple?
Nothing. There was nothing. In fact, there was only more ridicule and guilt and shaming. And so when we would participate in marriage weekends or participate, we felt like we were on a different, like you're tuning a radio, like the old school radios. You're just one notch off of hearing things clearly. You're never quite really the recipient of everything that someone is teaching, because it doesn't apply to your relationship. So finding people who were sensitive to neurodiverse relationships, it just was so difficult to find that. It was difficult for me nationally to find that, never mind locally almost impossible. And so yeah, it was very difficult to find a place to call home in terms of having someone in your life that understood. I would spend so much time explaining to a counselor our relationship that I was teaching them. And so it wasn't actually very helpful. So for everyone in ministry out there, if you can take classes, get connected to, pursue environments, pursue trainings on neurodiverse couples, it's so powerful, because if you don't, those couples, I don't know what the divorce rate or separation rate is for neurodiverse couples. I bet it's pretty high. And part of the reason is because it's very lonely. And when you don't have someone to talk to, or someone that might even, well-intentioned, maybe even listen well, but are not trained, then it's very difficult to feel understood. Because what I would tell people is like, listen, I don't need to be heard. I really don't. I have a lot of great friends in my life. I'm very blessed in that way. Being heard and understood, and some of that Freudian sort of, approach to counseling was not helpful at all. What I need are answers, because my marriage is just about broken. I need some glue. Like I need something to help, like right now. And I'm so grateful that we found you, and what you do in your ministry. It's been marriage saving and life saving for us, for sure. And I know that my children and my grandchildren and my family and my extended family, if they could say thank you to you, they would. So, but and not to mention all the thousands of people that are in my social neighborhood. It's sort of innumerable in many ways, and by proximity, same with Dan, because the impact, Dan, that you've had on your relationship and the way that you guys have handled things. Stephanie couldn't do what she's doing today without you. So it's really remarkable, the impact and all the things that I get to do, have the privilege of doing in my life, in my profession, is really it has a direct impact on what I do. And so, yeah, I couldn't say thank you enough, and encourage other people in ministry to, at the very least, take a look and pursue whatever training that you can.
Thank you for that. Wasn't it you that sent me the CDC? So if you're here, if you're out there listening, well, this just doesn't affect a lot of couples and a lot of people. Wasn't it like 5.4 million adults in the United States?
2.2% of adults.
So 2.2%.
5 million.
Right. So there are 5 million adults in the United States. And I would say probably most of them are undiagnosed.
Yeah.
Or if that is the diagnosed rate, then who is still being missed? So I think that's kind of the thing for getting training for coaches and pastors, is like, well, it's just really not that big of a population. Well, I think over 5 million people. It's pretty,
well, I think
big population.
I think so too. And how many worship or how many pastoral conferences do you need to go to hear the same thing over and over and over again? It's the same thing. And so why not branch out, and why not do something that is just totally unfamiliar to you, and go learn that? I would go to conferences just for breaks from my life. So I'd go to two workshops or two, keynote sessions, and then go sleep. That was what I would do. But why not get the training and be helpful? And what the other thing too, Stephanie and Dan, is that I can walk into a room now and somehow I'm a magnet to people with autism and Asperger's, and it's because you see it, right? Like your radar is on and you see it. And so for whatever reason, I attract people like that. And you know what? I think it's perfectly wonderful. I've never been the type of guy who's like, oh, who's the most popular in the room? I'm going to go hang out with them, or I'm going to go hang out with my friends. I'm always looking for the people that are in the corner, not talking to anybody. And if I can be a blessing to them, that's great. And so, yeah, I'm grateful for the new sight that I have when it comes to seeing people that wrestle with neurodiverse relationships and life.
Well, thank y'all both for being on the show, opening up about your story. Please go back and listen to Just the Girls, and you'll hear a little bit more of Molly's kind of personal discovery. And so kind of low key, I had you plug my book a little bit there, Gary, because we do have a book coming out by Morgan James Publishing. And we have a chapter that goes specifically on the different types of neurodiverse relationships. We talk about women on the spectrum and what some of those are. So if you want to follow the book launch, go to christianneurodivers.marriage.com, click on Uniquely Us. By the time this is out, there should be a timeline as to when this book is coming out.
Exciting.
If you like the podcast, please like and subscribe and comment. We are hearing that we're being heard in 40 countries. And so you're wondering, like, why in the world in 40 countries? We are hearing from ministers, missionaries, and military families who the podcast is their only source of training on neurodiversity. So please like and comment to get it out to our other English-speaking friends around the nation and the world.